Birth interventions are so commonplace these days that we just assume that they're normal and okay. But what do these interventions really do to our bodies? In today's episode, I talk with midwife Bernadette Lack from Australia about the impact birth interventions have on the body and what healing needs to happen because of them. Hello, friends. This is Lynn Schulte, and you are listening to the Birth Healing Summit podcast. We are here for meaningful conversations that will transform the way you work with pregnant and postpartum clients. Whether it is a new perspective, tool, or technique, you'll be able to implement it into your practice today. I invite you to sit back, listen with an open mind, and grab the golden nugget today's guest has to offer. Now let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Birth Healing Summit podcast. And today I am thrilled to have back with us, well, not back, because Bernadette Lack, who is a midwife in Australia, we did our summit interview and oh my God, it was so good. And we are going to be talking today about the interventions. So the birth interventions impact on our body. Welcome to the podcast, Bernadette. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, so we just got done having a 30-minute conversation just back and forth before we hit the record button that we probably should have recorded all that stuff, right?
I know, as we were talking, it always happens. You're like, but
Right.
we're just warming up. So I'm like, that was the flow. That was to bring the flow. And now we're like, okay,
Okay,
the
now we're
more
hitting
juicier
record.
stuff is here for
Yes,
the recording.
because
But
you
we've
guys,
decided you and I need a weekly chat. So
we do. We do. So we are going to be talking about birth interventions impact on our bodies. So what do you mean by that, Bernadette, and where should we start?
So I think just as a culture, we're really unconscious to the impact any kind of medical procedures have on us. So it's not
Yeah.
just labor and birth interventions, it's infertility interventions, it's conception interventions, it's what could be seen as routine operations and all the things that we can experience. So, for me, I had my tonsils out, my appendix out. Yeah, as a
Tonsils.
kid. And
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just such a routine. Yeah, that just happens. And it's become so mainstream in our society when you think about the history and the herstory of human beings, these procedures are so new. And they're things that happen to us that our bodies can't do for themselves. And so, it's something like an induction, it has become so widely accepted and almost now perceived as what needs to happen for a baby to be born. Same with cesareans. And so, I think it's really important as practitioners that we can start to have conversations with the body and with the whole person, perhaps around how it feels for the body to have received that kind of intervention. So an intervention can be a cannula. So for example, I give blood, I donate blood, and before I do it, I tell my body what's going to happen because literally blood is being drained from my body. Like that is not something that is normal physiology for the body. It's normal physiology for the body to lose blood during our bleeds, during our cycles,
Yeah.
and at birth, but at no other time. And it's especially not normal for it to come out of the arm. And
Right.
so my approach to this is really not what the mind recalls or thinks, not what the brain has been conditioned to believe, but how it would feel from the body's point of view to receive this.
I love that because I truly feel in my clinical practice that there are two separate consciousnesses almost. That there
Yeah.
is the mind consciousness, the thinking, talking part of our heads, but yet the body has its own level of consciousness. And
Yeah. And that's where often trauma relives. And
yes,
that is why it can be so hard for people to heal because most people, there's that saying, we feel safer to be in a familiar hell than an unfamiliar heaven. And I really see
uh,
our prefrontal cortex, those cycling thoughts, as our familiar hell. And the unfamiliar heaven is the body's wisdom, because the what the body holds, it's so incredibly wise, but we're just so disconnected from it. We're really dense as human beings right now. We have to be to for the world to be in the state that it's in, we have to be so dense and disconnected. But I'm so hopeful and optimistic because when I can work with someone who's never connected to their body, and at the end of the session, they will feel into their body and they will reconnect with that power. And that's my biggest thing is about restoring power. But I think even our definition of power is so construed. Like we really see power in that masculine sense, in that business and money sense,
Yeah.
whereas to me power feels like freedom. It
Mhm.
actually, power in the body feels like a deep sense of calm and freedom and trust, which is the feminine, right? And
Yeah.
I believe our greatest source of power is our womb, because when people connect to their body, the heart is always the place of compassion.
Hmm.
But if someone is willing to connect to their womb, oof,
Yeah.
that is where you see deep knowing and power. And so for me, I'm like, how does it feel for a body to receive an epidural and be numbed out in process that it's meant to have complete control over? Because birth is a body event, and there are mechanisms that the body is meant to go through. And so to put an epidural on that, how does it feel for the body? It might be really soothing for some people's minds, and for other people's minds, it won't be soothing because it's not what they wanted. But how does that impact the body? And then how does that impact the relationship between body and baby? Because labor and birth is a partnership between the body and the baby. And so then when the epidural comes in, we take the body out of it. So then what happens?
Well, the
You know,
baby's
and
lost in there, right? Because the baby doesn't have anything to connect to anymore.
yeah, what is the feedback, and what does that impact have? And I know this is really big and really triggering, and I don't believe there's a right or wrong way to birth, and I always believe there's a time to heal. So just sending a lot of love if
Yeah.
you've had an epidural and you're listening to this and you're like, oh, we're never doing anything wrong. We're always doing the very best we can
In the
at the
moment.
time,
Yeah.
to protect ourselves. And I always say to people, in your shoes, I do the exact same thing, because you've had the exact same experience, all the same conditioning, all the same education, you would make the same decision.
Yeah.
And so I don't believe it's wrong. And epidurals can be really great in some labors for some people,
Mhm.
100%.
Yeah.
And then what healing perhaps needs to occur. And so, it's the same as the body being cut an episiotomy and a cesarean. How does that feel for a womb that's meant to be working really hard to contract to get a baby out, to then be sliced open? And the reason I know this works so deeply, apart from all the incredible people I have the privilege to work with, is because I was bitten and killed by a snake when I was 12. And for 25 years, that was a really cool story,
Yeah.
until the day I finally felt safe enough to connect with my body. And it was actually through internal release. It was
Wow.
I was actually, we were just talking about Tammy Lynn Kent's work
Uh-huh.
before we started. And I
Uh-huh.
was at her course in Australia, and my best friend was there, and she's an osteopath, and she's helped me through some really big stuff. And Tammy told us not to go into our normal work, but we broke the rules because her and I are rule breakers. So apologies, Tammy, if you're listening to this. But she had her fingers in my vagina, and she said, I feel like I need to come and treat your heart. And I've had incontinence since I was 19. And I always put it down to a number of things, but intuitively, I really felt like it was there, because the first time my incredible pelvic space was penetrated was with a catheter when I was intubated and in a coma.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, yeah, so huge, right?
Big,
So
big,
huge.
big, big, big.
And
Yeah.
so big. Yeah, I was 11, right? And
Yeah.
I still remember my only real memories after I was resuscitated is are all connected with that catheter, all
Wow.
connected. And so she had her hands in my vagina and she was touching my bladder and she said, I feel like I need to treat your heart. And I was like, yeah, cool. And she's like, I've never treated a heart before. And I was like, I trust you. And she
Yeah.
came out and she put her hands ever so gently, like she does the most gentle, beautiful osteopathic work. And she had her hands on my heart. And she obviously could see, she obviously knew why she needed to go there, but she hadn't communicated that with me. And so I was like, oh, I'm fine. We're just practicing.
Yeah.
And I was like, babe, I've got a really bad headache. And she was like, mm-hmm. And I was like, no, like I've got it, like my head, I feel like my head's going to burst. And she was like, yep. And then I was like, I don't know what you're doing, but I can't breathe. Like my chest, I was like, I can't breathe. And then my body started to talk. And what my body said was, I didn't ask to be resuscitated. And I started crying, and it's still here for me now because it's still big. And I was like,
I
and I,
just got
and my,
full body chills there, Bernadette.
yeah,
Wow.
my
Yeah.
body was like, I didn't ask. And I have to say, the reason this was safe to do was because a month before that, I had met with a nurse that had actually looked after me. And she is the daughter of Peter Jackson, who runs Calm Birth Australia.
Uh-huh.
And I am now a midwife. And we were at a conference together out to dinner. And we were talking about adrenaline. And I brought up my snake bite story. And she said to me, how old were you? When was this? And I told her the year. And she said, I was one of your nurses. I can still see you there in your hospital bed. And the moment she spoke those words to me, I burst into tears and I cried and I cried. And my girlfriends were there and they were like, what? Like, what are the chances? Like, everyone was just a
Yeah.
bit in shock. But that was the defining moment for me, for my body to finally be heard. That event was traumatic because I got to be on the news. I went back to school, like I'd been on the news. I was cool, right? I was going into year
Yeah.
six. And so it was always just a great story. And so in that moment, I saw the trauma in it. So that had happened in the September, and then in the October, we were at Tammy's course.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really trust the universe's path
Uh-huh.
with that.
Yep.
I trust that 25 years was
Unfoldment
needed.
of it. Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yep.
I trust this is here so I can do the work that I'm doing.
Yep.
And so what had happened, the headache was the first symptom I got when I got bitten by the snake. And then I remember saying to my mum, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. My chest is caving in. And then I said to my mum, I can't see. And I went out. And so at the point where I said I couldn't see, that's when my body started to talk. And I've obviously done a lot of work around this, and it's
Yeah.
still live, it's still there. But the resuscitation brought me back to the trauma,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Dying was really peaceful and calm, and I got to leave, and the resuscitation brought me back to the trauma. And so it was actually really traumatic on my body to receive. I had 7 doses of antivenin and so much adrenaline, and then catheters and all of that. And so that is how I understand it personally, and it's what's driven my body of work now. But
Yeah.
you just yesterday I met with this woman, and she's in my mentorship, and I actually said, I've got this today. How would it feel for you? Is it a full body yes for me to share your story? And she said yes. And so she has 3 children, aged between 1 and 12. And so her first birth was 12 years ago, really traumatic. And, she trusts the journey of it, and it's what has led her to become a midwife. And she now is the most incredible midwife. And she's doing my course, and she was practicing having a birth debrief. And so she was like, yeah, I can talk about my first birth. She's like, I've told my story so many times. I've just told it. It's easy for me to tell. And so she sat down to tell it, and she said, I was so shocked because I got to the bit where I had an episiotomy, and she said, I don't remember having the episiotomy. I had an epidural. I didn't feel it. I don't even remember it. So her mind doesn't recall it yet.
Yeah.
And I say yet because the mind will only recall what is safe to recall around our trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so she said, I don't remember it. And so, and then when I got to it, all of a sudden it was just so uncontrollably big. And she said it was such a shock because I had no idea that this story was here for me. I had no idea that that part of my labor and birth was actually big because it wasn't anything. I didn't even remember it. So how could it be this big? And this is so how so many of us see our stories and what's happened to us. And then she said, but now that I think about it as a midwife, any person who has an episiotomy, or when we're talking about the person might need an episiotomy, it feels so big in my body. It feels so huge. And I'm like, yeah, honey, that's your body reliving its trauma.
Yeah.
That's your body reliving, because trauma is a reliving. It's not a memory. We're not going back to our past. It's the body is actually thinking, oh, this is
I'm
happening to
there
me again.
now.
I'm
Right.
there. They're
Yeah.
about to cut me. They've just cut me.
Yeah.
And so, I really see any cut as a huge assault on the body. Same with, you call it Pitocin, we call it Syntocin. It's the body is programmed. And for people that are really tech savvy, the body is coded
Yeah.
really well. Labor and birth, there's a coding, there's a whole, script on how it's meant to go. And then these interventions come in. What then happens to the code? What then does the body do with this unexpected intervention? And so, and when people are doing birth prep with me, I often say, talk to your body and your baby. This is going to happen. We're going to have a cesarean. We're going to be cut. This is safe for us. This is what is needed in this time. But that connection between mind and body, whereas most of the time there's a disconnection and often a real disassociation. We often, really, really leave. And so for her, it's like, yeah, just think about what it would have felt like for your body to be cut. It is, it's an assault, and to be cut under epidural as well is even often more, because there's this total body vulnerability. There's no longer is the body in charge at a time where it's meant to be in charge. This is its time to shine, to do its thing. But it's then having things done to it in that vulnerability. And so, I often talk about induction. It's like women will say, I'll say to them, does it feel like it's in a glass cabinet? Does labor, like normal, I don't want to say normal, that's not the right word, apologies. Does physiological labor feel like it's in this glass cage and you can see it, but you just can't touch it? And they're like, yes, it feels like that's what my body was meant to do, but I just can't get to it. And I often explain induction, like, what it's like to go and have a really good poo, right? Everyone knows what it feels like. You go, you
Yes.
get the urge, you make the space, you go and have a good poo, and afterwards it's like, oh, great,
Yeah.
right?
Your whole body feels relaxed and relieved, right?
Yeah, it's
With
because
a
it's
good one.
released what it needed to, and the
Yeah.
physiological functioning has occurred, right?
Yep.
But then imagine you take medication to make that poo come out. So anyone that's ever prepped for like a colonoscopy, for example, or they've taken medication to clear their bowels out, it doesn't feel the same. It feels painful. It feels different. It often can feel like a violation. You're no longer in control.
Yeah.
And that is really how that comparison between poo and baby, obviously it's a much bigger thing that we are
Process. Yep.
releasing, a
Yes.
bigger process, a bigger thing that we're releasing from our body, and a bigger reward if the physiological process has been completed. But
Yeah.
it's that violation, it's that assault. And what I often find when I work with people post-birth is actually their bodies are still often stuck the moment they had the epidural, at the moment they had the episiotomy, at the moment they had the cesarean, because the body's in shock of
Yep.
what do we do? And the transformation hasn't been allowed to occur. And I want to say, if you're listening to this going, oh my goodness, I can, I've definitely treated people like that or felt that myself, the power gets restored because the body can be connected with in such a beautiful way, and can become unstuck. And
Yeah.
that's really what I love, is that completion of the transformation. And just I'm always in awe of what the body is able to heal from. It wants to heal. It
Yes.
wants to feel better. And so, we have so much birth trauma in this world, and really so much trauma prior to birth. And
Mm-hmm.
I see birth and coming into motherhood and parenting as such an optimal time for healing
Mm-hmm.
when we're truly held by someone. So my beautiful bestie, when I was like, my head hurts, she was like, yeah, yeah. She wasn't afraid. She could hold me in it.
Right.
And
Yes.
I've had other practitioners that are like, you don't need to go there. You don't, because so much of body work can be about bringing the body back to health. So
Uh-huh.
they're like, you don't have to go there. And I don't believe you do. I believe people can heal and not go there. But some of us also want to be held in it. And if I hadn't have been held in that, I wouldn't have had the transformation that I've had. And I wouldn't have connected with my body in that way. The power would have lied still in the hands of the practitioner. That
Mm.
practitioner would have brought me back to my health. Whereas what she did was create the space for me to be able to come back into my own power. And I think that is such an important part of being a practitioner is that we don't do that work for people. We hold the space and the safety for them to do it themselves because it's so much more profound.
Yeah, absolutely. It and it's magical too. It's so flippin' magical to help someone to reconnect back in, to find their own power, to heal what needs to be healed. And I just trust that whatever is supposed to, over the years, I've learned to be able to just trust that whatever is showing up in a session is exactly what needs to be explored, needs to be
Yeah.
revealed, and that the body is doing it for a reason. So
And
learning,
that revealing is really all that's needed, that we create the space for the revelations and then the body will integrate exactly as it needs to. And it's just, this is, I believe, what is needed for human beings to really heal and for the world to come back into or to come closer into balance. And I really see this as the way forward for us. So I'm just so grateful for you and the work you do and everyone listening to this today for your openness. And, it really is going to take us as practitioners to stand in our power, to believe in this and to hold it for people. We have an incredible, privileged amount of work to do.
yes, yes. And it's very important for us as practitioners to do our own work so that we
Yeah, we
can,
talk about that in the Birth Institute. We talk about how important that
yeah.
is and why.
So in the Birth Healing Summit this April, everybody, Bernadette and I dive into more about that. Do you want to share a little bit more about what we talked about in that interview?
We talked about being in our power as practitioners
Hmm.
and how to actually hold the space for someone to find their own and yeah, why it's important. We kind of really unraveled that last little piece there of how to
Yeah,
really connect in with people's bodies and create that safety and guide it. But it's really that initiation because the body guides it. And
right.
so we talk the person who we're treating, their body really guides it. So it's really about, yeah, holding that initiation. I'm trying to think because it was just I mean, it was
I
only
know.
last week, and then
So
we've talked all this
I
morning, but
know, right? So Bernadette and I, the what we talked about is restoring power through holistic connective practices. And so how to get more intuitive information in our sessions, how to best connect to our clients, what the foundation of healing really is. You even you talked about the future of healing with AI. That
mm,
was very interesting. So we're going to leave everybody hanging with that. So that you can really check out the Birth Healing Summit this year so that you can learn more about this. It was a fabulous, one of my highlights, one of my favorites from this year's summit. And I just absolutely adore you, Bernadette, and the work that you're doing. And I just am so, so grateful. So please, everybody, join the summit, check out Bernadette's interview because what she has to say is incredibly powerful, incredibly important for us to know and understand. as we do this work in the world. So, Bernadette, thank you. You are such a blessing to us all. I'm so
Thank
grateful.
you. I'm
Yeah.
so grateful that, yeah, we've connected and we've been able to put this out into the world because I can already feel the ripple effects. So, yeah.
Awesome. So great. Thank you, everybody, for listening in to this podcast. And we will see you on the next one. Here's to smoother births and faster recoveries, everybody. Take care. Bye bye. Today's podcast was brought to you by the Institute for Birth Healing. To discover more, visit instituteforbirthhealing.com. To claim $50 off of any online course, use coupon code podcast50 at checkout. Till next time, I'm Lynn Schulte, founder of the Institute for Birth Healing.